Let's take a look at the difference between a local and a global macro. Now, if you're not familiar with the terms local macro and global macro, it's possibly because I made those terms up. But it's a way that I describe to my students the two different behaviors that a macro can take on. Local macros are stored in the file that they're intended to be used in, whereas a global macro is stored in this thing called the Personal Macro Workbook. Local macros are only accessible when the file they're stored in is open. Now, they're available to every other open file, but only while that source file is open. Global macros are always accessible the moment that Excel is opened. It's almost like the global macro is a feature of Excel. Local macros can travel with the file because they're stored in the file. So if the macro can be used by one person, if it's emailed to another, the next person can use the macro. Whereas global macros are specific to a single device, like a single PC. So it can only be used when the user is sitting at that machine. Now, every one of these points can be viewed as either a pro or a con, depending on your perspective. The Personal Macro Workbook stores macros that can be used at any time by any open Excel file. As stated a moment ago, it's like it's a feature of the Excel program. Macros are stored in a file named Personal.XLSB. The B stands for binary file. This Personal.XLSB file is automatically created when you record your first global macro. This file opens and closes automatically when Excel opens and closes. But you don't see the file because the file is hidden by default. Now, I'll show you how you can reveal this file, but typically you don't need to. The Personal.XLSB file must reside in a very specific location on each PC. That path is here: the C drive, users folder, then the user's profile login name, APPDATA, roaming, Microsoft, Excel, Excel start. To see the Personal Macro Workbook in its natural habitat, we'll go to the C drive, then the users folder, then we double-click on the folder for the user's profile. Now at this point, we need to go into the AppData folder, but the AppData folder is hidden by default. Now there are ways you can turn the hidden folders on, but then you'll have to turn them back off when you're through. So a little trick to get into the AppData folder without actually unhiding it is to click in the address bar, and then right after the user's login name, add to the end a backslash, and then type in AppData. And when you hit enter, you'll be in the AppData folder. So it's like jumping over a wall that was hiding these subfolders. We'll go to roaming, scroll down to Microsoft, and then Excel, Excel start. And here you can see the Personal.XLSB file. If we were to click back up in the address bar, you can see here the full path that I just took. Any file placed in this Excel start folder will automatically open when Excel starts. So if you're a prankster, you can have a little fun with this with some of your coworkers. Now in my case, this Personal.XLSB file stores two macros, one that will sort my worksheets in alphabetical order in ascending order, and the other in descending order. And since I do that a lot, I want to be able to use that code in virtually any Excel file I open. So I've placed those macros in my Personal Macro Workbook. So let's see it in action, and then I'll show you how to create it from the ground up. We'll go down to Start, Launch Excel. We'll start a blank workbook. Now, I'm not going to go into this in this part of the video, but possibly in a future video, but there are many ways to launch macros that are either local or global. One way is to add buttons to your quick access toolbar. So you can see up here I have a button that says Sort My Sheets in Ascending Order, and I have one that says Sort My Sheets in Descending Order. But I also have a custom ribbon called My Macros, where I've added two buttons to launch those macros, so I can sort my sheets in either ascending or descending order. Looking back at my Excel Start folder, I've deleted my Personal.XLSB file. Now don't worry for me, I did back it up. But I wanted you to see how if you've never done this before, this is what your Excel Start folder will look like. It will just be empty. So to create our first global macro, we'll go into Excel. I'll start a blank workbook. Now if you have no code to put in the Personal Macro Workbook at the moment, but you just want to create the environment, here's probably the quickest and easiest way to do it. If you look down in the lower left corner of the screen, we have a Record Macros button. So I'm going to give that a click, and in this dialog box, it wants to know where I wish to put this macro. Now the macro we're going to record has nothing in it. It'll be an empty macro, just enough to get the environment created. So I don't want to store it in this workbook, so I'm going to change this to the Personal Macro Workbook. I'll hit OK. That starts the macro recorder, but I'm going to immediately go down to the same location in the lower left and just stop the macro recorder. So I basically just started and stopped the recorder, but didn't do anything. If I press Alt F11, I'll open the Visual Basic Editor, and we can see Book 1, which is the empty workbook that I created, but also Personal.XLSB, which was created in the background. In the Personal Macro Workbook is a modules folder that contains a single module sheet called Module 1. Here is the empty macro that I just created. Now I don't really want this, so I'm going to highlight it and delete it. But it's this module sheet and any other module sheets that you wish to create in the file that can store all of your global macro code. From that sort sheets video download that I mentioned a moment ago, I've copied the code into my clipboard. So on this module sheet, I'll hit paste and I'll just paste that code into position. So this is the code that sorts the sheets in ascending order, and then this is the code that sorts the sheets in descending order. Again, feel free to go download that file from the sort sheets macro tutorial. If we look back at the Excel start folder, you can see the creation of the Personal.XLSB file. Now I would also take this module sheet and give it a better name, something like sort sheets. So that way if I decide to add other macros to my Personal Macro Workbook, I can right-click and insert another module, and then put whatever code on this sheet I want, and that helps me organize my macros. I'm going to right-click and delete that. I'll close the Visual Basic Editor. Now, if you need to launch one of those macros, but you don't wish to customize your Quick Access toolbar or create a custom ribbon, you can just hold down your Alt key and hit F8. And this will bring up a list of all of your macros, both local and global. So I could click on either ascending or descending and run the code. If you wish to create custom buttons on your Quick Access toolbar, check out my video on the ultimate guide for customizing the QAT. Link in the description and in the corner. I mentioned earlier that the Personal.XLSB file can be displayed while Excel is running. It's hidden by default, but if you go up to the View tab and then choose Unhide, this will show all hidden workbooks. And as you can see, Personal.XLSB is one of those hidden workbooks. So I'll choose the Personal Macro Workbook, hit OK. And now I'm looking at the contents of the Personal.XLSB file. Now typically you would not put anything in this file, it's just a place to store macros. Now if you close Excel and you leave Personal in this visible state, when you reopen Excel, it will also reopen in a visible state. So make sure you go back up to View and choose Hide, and hide it before you close Excel. Now since we just created the Personal Macro Workbook, like any other file, it needs to be saved. But since the file is hidden, you can't exactly go up and click File Save. So when you close Excel, Excel will ask you, do you wish to save the changes to your Personal Macro Workbook? So I'm going to choose Save and close Excel. Now that file will be retained in the Excel Start folder. If I relaunch Excel, start a blank workbook, I'll make a series of new worksheets, but then I can press Alt F8, and you can see that the Personal Macro Workbook macros are still there. The internet is absolutely overflowing with examples of pre-made VBA code. A simple search with your favorite search engine will reveal more resources than you can possibly imagine. So go out there, get code, copy-paste it into your Personal Macro Workbook, create those custom ribbons, and start turning those long, arduous tasks into single-click operations. Thank you for watching, and remember, at BCTI, the learning never stops.